This ACC coach is moving up Penn State's coaching board, and he would be a great hire for the Nittany Lions.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
That is right. It is a Locked On crossover to talk Penn State football in this continued coaching search. My name is Seyko, and I'm the host of Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily source for all things Penn State. He is Brian Smith, college football expert, recruiting expert, host of The Portal, as we're going to talk about Penn State's coaching search, but the best case in recruiting, the ramifications when it comes to recruiting based on when Penn State ultimately makes its decision and who they ultimately hire, which we will talk about, assessing other main candidates in this coaching race. But we're going to focus on one particular ACC coach where the expectation is that, hey, Penn State and this coach are actually going to meet for an interview. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. Friendly reminder to let us know your thoughts down in the comments section. So, Brian, I'm eager to get your thoughts on this because, again, you're plugged into the southeast part of the country, and a name like Brent Key is going to resonate with you just because of the connections with the SEC and everything else. And Key's now settled in at Georgia Tech, but he's turned, I know they just lost, but he is someone that is definitely rising up a lot of teams' coaching boards because of the quick turnaround that he's had at Georgia Tech. Again, I know they just lost, but I would very much like this hire for Penn State. Not my top candidate. Again, I will continue to say Mike Elko until a hire is actually made, but I would not be upset if Penn State ends up going with Brent Key because just of the way that at a place like Georgia Tech, that he's been able to work the transfer portal and NIL at a school with such high expectations for academics. Imagine if you gave him the resources that Penn State has to work with.
Yeah, I think it would be a big time hire. He's probably about as undervalued as it gets because Georgia Tech had been off the maps for, 25 years in terms of a big time program. Yep. They've always had good teams and they were competitive or upset somebody. But when was the last time Georgia Tech was a team you're like, oh, they could end up in the Final Four or Final Eight or something? Mm-hmm. Probably not, maybe not even in your lifetime. So that's been
I think of Calvin Johnson and Jonathan Dwyer. Yeah. That's what I think of when I think of Georgia Tech.
Those are great players, but those aren't great teams. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem. Like they just haven't had it. So Calvin Johnson, I think his last year at Tech was like 2007 or something like that. It's been a long time ago. So long story short, Tech just doesn't get the players. They go to Georgia. If they stay in state, they go to Georgia. Yeah. By all intents and purposes, that is until recently, a one-school state in terms of Power 4 schools. That's why Georgia is such a dominant program. But he came back to his alma mater and made it happen. Good hires. Buster Faulkner, somebody we'll talk about here in a minute, is his OC. He's had other guys on his staff do very, very well. And they kind of just fit what they want to be. And they're not trying to fool anybody. We're going to be power football. We're going to run the quarterback. We're going to bleed the clock. They're somewhere in between Navy and old school Michigan, like with their offense. They run a little bit of this and that. They kind of combine it with all the jet sweeps and all the different stuff for eye candy. Power football, they kind of hold on for dear life on defense because they can't recruit to the level like a Penn State can. But they do a pretty good job considering on that side too. So that would be a very intriguing hire for the Nittany Lions.
And the rumor, the expectation is that Penn State and Brent Key were supposed to meet this week to discuss it, an in-person interview since Georgia Tech is on a bye. Brian, I want to present this to you because you mentioned already that Brent Key is an alum of Georgia Tech. It's a similar thing when you have these conversations about, and we'll talk about them more, Jeff Brohm, Clark Lee at Louisville and Vanderbilt respectively, is that the connections run deep at their alma mater. So if I say to you, Brent Key is using this as a leverage play to potentially get more resources from Georgia Tech, some more stability. The rumor was that James Franklin was doing that a lot of the times. And then, contract extension happened when he was linked to USC, Florida. Once upon a time, it's crazy to say that now. But would you say that's might be a similar setup here with Key entertaining Penn State like this?
It's possible. If you think about Key, I'm imagining like he's got to have phone calls from Auburn. They may not say it, but I'm sure Florida's had some relations with that. It's wide. The fact that he would even look at Penn State shouldn't be surprising, but he's a Southern guy. Matter of fact, I have his.
I know
list
he doesn't
up
have any. He doesn't have any connections to the Northeast, which is my only
here.
concern,
Right.
so to speak, about him, because he's a phenomenal coach. He would build a great
Sure.
staff. He would bring some great staff members with him. You already named one of them in the offensive coordinator. Just that's what I'm saying is that if this was Florida, if this was Auburn, I could make a little more sense of it. But Brent Key's interest in Penn State from the location, proximity, just his upbringing is a little unorthodox. That's all I'm saying. But Penn State itself as a brand is appealing, which is why, that kind of puts all of that to rest.
Well, to put it in perspective, Nick Saban was a Midwest guy, and he went from Michigan State to LSU. It went good from that point forward. So if you're really good, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But we don't know if he is or if he's just comfy at his alma mater. And background, UCF, Alabama from 2016 to 2018. And
Nick Saban disciple.
Yeah, like that doesn't hurt. He was the O-line coach for Nick. You know how picky Nick is about offensive and defensive lines, rightfully so.
Yeah.
He was right there in the middle of all those first-round draft picks. So needless to say, that's a guy that knows,
he knows what
he's
knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing.
I would imagine that they would be able to be a pretty dominant program at Penn State, and he's been a giant killer. I don't think there's any doubt that Penn State fans should be excited if he ended up being the coach. Like it's hard to win at Tech. They've got a very limited curriculum. Like it's management, it's math, and just some basic stuff. And then of course, everything in the world to do with engineering. That's what Georgia Tech is. It's very limited. Yeah. You're not hiding athletes there. You're not. So at Penn State, a very broad school, it's a good school, but kids can take an easier route and still get an education. But at Georgia Tech, there ain't any way in the world you're doing that. So he probably wants an opportunity with that, and the money would be better, not only for himself, but NIL, for facilities like Penn State's. What was the renovation Penn State put in? How much is that renovation?
$700 million into Beaver Stadium.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. So they can't do that at Tech. There wouldn't even be the room to do it anyway, because it's right in the middle of the city. So I'm curious how serious he is about this, because I think it would be a fantastic hire. He's one of the few guys that doesn't have a tie to an area that I wouldn't care.
You can't go wrong with it. Let's just say that. It's not a bad hire. It's not this is okay. This still checks a lot of boxes. Is it the A+ top hire? No, but I still think this is an A- at a very minimum, a B+, especially with what Brent Key is as a person and as a program builder. Okay, I'm not saying that Penn State needs to be rebuilt. They're going to give him everything he needs to hit the ground running. But Key, I just like his physical mentality, that we're going to out physical the other opponent. And that just works in the Big Ten. I feel like Penn State's just been such a finesse program for the better part of James Franklin's tenure. They tried to get back to that recently over the past few years by running and having a 2 running back setup and everything and focusing on building out the offensive line. But now you would get a guy that has proven that he can do it, that he knows how to do it. I mean, he's lived it. He was an offensive lineman at Georgia Tech. So just the physical mentality in the Big Ten Conference, I think Penn State needs that again, where they play with that physical chip on their shoulder, and Brent Key would be the guy to orchestrate that.
100%. You couldn't have said it any better. Penn State can overcome a lot, at least they have historically, by being the more physical team. When I was growing up, some of the games that Paterno's squads won, they weren't the better team from a roster standpoint, but they won the line of scrimmage. And in the fourth quarter, they gave themselves a chance in a 1-score game. They didn't always win, but they were right there, and they were just rarely outfoxed at the line of scrimmage. So that's the same kind of thing that Key is. And I'm not saying he's going to be Paterno in terms of total wins or whatever, but same style. I think Penn State fans would really like that too. And that's not wrong with that. I think that would be great for college football.
Can't go wrong with Brent Key. Can't go wrong with a lot of other names that we're going to talk about. Jeff Brohm. Yes, Mike Elko. Who are the other realistic names that bring a lot to Penn State if they were to be hired? We're going to discuss them coming up next here on this Locked On Crossover. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets. That's right, $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And you can use that all across FanDuel. Those bonus bets on NFL football, NBA basketball, college football. Lines are available for Penn State and Indiana if you're interested in that game. Penn State is pretty significant underdog. Plus 14.5 on the spread. The Indiana Hoosiers are favored here. Minus 820 on the money line for the Hoosiers. Plus 550 if you're thinking Penn State for a full-on upset. The total is set at 48.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them over at FanDuel. And remember, new customers get $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head over to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Well, Penn State is doing their due diligence. It's not just Brent Key. There are tons of other names that are, I'd say it's a pretty even race. So Brian, we're going to start with your favorite candidate and also discuss the Urban Meyer rumors that Penn State told him no and what that means in this coaching search. So beginning with your favorite candidate above all else, in terms of realistic, right? I imagine you're a big fan of Mike Elko as much as I am, even though logistically that's going to be really tough. But I'm just here to say never until it's finalized. But Jeff Brohm, in terms of that combination of what he actually brings, plus the realistic possibility of it, I like Brohm a ton too. And I just talked about it the other day with our counterparts at Locked On ACC that, Jeff Brohm's 1A and Brent Key is 1B. You can't go wrong with either of them. But my preference is certainly for Jeff Brohm if you can get him away from his alma mater.
Same thing with Key. It's really hard to do, but you got to make the phone call because at the end of the day, it's free. Not many things in life are free, but a phone call, you're already paying the cell bill. Go ahead and make the phone call. Brohm would be a very unique hire because at Louisville, while they've tried really hard and they've got really good NIL,
they do.
Elite linemen in particular just don't go there. They got to kill it in the portal and overspend, and they're still not getting the kids that are going first, second round. Could you imagine what Brohm would do with real offensive tackles that are draftable in the first or second round, like you could get at Penn State? Their offense would average 480 a game, 500 a game. And it wouldn't be finangled. Like that game plan he had against Miami was tremendous, but he prepared for 2 weeks and threw in all kinds of things.
Yep.
Miami still had to play bad for them to win. They just don't have as many players.
Yep.
You put him on equal footing with other teams in the top 15, like 9-3 would be the 4, and there would be a lot of 10-2 and above. So I think it would be a fantastic hire. And for the record, I have no idea if he's interested in really leaving, but the fact that he hasn't come out and made a statement about Florida, Penn State, or anybody else, there's something there. I mean, maybe he's just trying to get a bigger contract from his alma mater. That's always possible. But his passing game and the acumen that they have coming up with the scheme, I don't think he'd have a very hard time finding a defensive coordinator. Probably just keep the one they got now. So it seems like a natural, but again, Louisville is his alma mater. His brother coaches with him at Louisville, who also played at Louisville.
Yes.
Like, that's a tough thing, but I know he doesn't want to hear it. I highly doubt he's ever winning a title at Louisville. So he's got to make that decision at some point.
And Jeff Brohm, I mean, so many things there. Brian, let me add to this when you said that, hey, okay, he's not winning a national title at Louisville. He hasn't outright said no to Florida or Auburn or LSU. And other than Curt Cignetti, do you notice how any of these coaching candidates are all without an extension, even though they're all due an extension? Indiana took care of that right away. They hit Curt Cignetti and Indiana sat down and they got a deal done. Notice that Mike Elko doesn't have an extension. Kalen DeBoer doesn't have an extension. Jeff Brohm, Brent Key, all of these candidates do not have an extension at this point in time. That's all I'm saying is that if they were so key on staying at their respective programs, don't you think the extensions would start rolling in the same way that Curt Cignetti and Indiana got theirs done? That's all I'm saying there. Jeff Brohm, you want to talk about Penn State making the decision that they made to fire James Franklin? You would get maybe not the antithesis of James Franklin, but again, I say what in this head coaching search, Penn State needs to find somebody that's different. And Jeff Brohm would be exactly that. Because James Franklin could never win the big game. I feel like that's all Jeff Brohm really ever does, is when he's an underdog, when he has no business being in those kinds of games against top tier opponents, and he finds a way to win. 3 of them at Purdue. He succeeded at Western Kentucky, at Purdue, at Louisville. If you gave him the Penn State resources, and then like you said, that's what he could do, with a war chest, right? But I think it's funny to always point out now that Jeff Brohm has a more recent victory over Ohio State than James Franklin does at 2018 to 2016. So you were getting somebody that you fired James Franklin because he couldn't win the big game. You hire Jeff Brohm because he can win the big game. He's 4-4 against top 5 teams, 12-17 against top 10 teams. It's impressive, especially with where he's been.
Yeah, out of those games, he might have been the person coaching the team with more talent once or twice, maybe. So that's why I think he's an elite hire. Like if he went to Florida, could you imagine what he would do with the Gators talent? You know what I mean? Like it's just not that hard. If you can get him away, I don't know what the contract situation would be. And I've even published this recently on X, etc. I hate the 10-year contracts. That's probably the only way he's leaving, though. That's the problem. It's you're all in and you're on the hook. You have no leverage. But if you want the A+ hire, that's the only way you're going to get somebody like him. Because again, that's his alma mater at Louisville.
Let's talk about 2 other candidates, and I want to correct myself. He's 12-17 against top 25 teams. He's 5-7 against top 10 teams. Again, at the likes of Purdue, at the likes of Louisville, and 4-4 against top 5. I mean, you're 500. Yeah. You're batting 500 against top 5 teams with a win over Ohio State. May I add? That's going to sound great to Penn State fans. Let's talk about Mike Elko and Brian Hartline together. Which one's more realistic? Obviously, I think Elko, in your mind, is going to be the better hire overall. Brian Hartline, we've talked about before, just the recruiting advantages that he gives you, and he'd actually be able to give Penn State some upside at QB and wide receiver for obvious reasons. If you had to pick between the 2, which one would you say is more likely for Penn State? Because it's difficult to get either of them because Ohio State, that's his alma mater, Brian Hartline, and then, Texas A&M, that's a top 5 job, and you're not going to outspend Texas A&M, but I don't think Penn State's that far off in terms of what they can do financially.
I'd still say Hartline because Ryan Day would be able to just take over the offense. That would be my guess.
Which he's been doing, right?
Yeah,
pretty much.
I would imagine it's still his offense. Ryan Day, like him or not, and he's not the most likable guy from what it sounds like, he can coach. And offensive scheme, that's his bag. And of course, you got Jeremiah Smith out there. I could probably draw up that game plan too. But at the same time, Hartline got all those guys there. He's a really good teacher of the actual techniques. The receivers just win in one-on-ones there. If you're Penn State, I would assume you'd want him to come before the portal. That's the problem.
Yeah.
They're the best team in the country. Is he going to want to? I mean, that is the awkwardness. And same thing with A&M. Yeah. Elko's not coming until they're out of the playoff. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So that's every one of these schools. I went on with Brandon Olson, Locked On Gators. I've spoken to Zach, Locked On Auburn, etc. All these schools are hosed when it comes to signing day.
Yeah.
Hardly anybody is going to be hired before then because that's 4 days after the first or the end of the season. That's on the 29th of November, and then signing day is on December 3rd. The portal, however, doesn't open until January the 2nd. Yeah. So there's a little more room there. But if you don't get it done by then, you're going to struggle probably next year. Do you want to waste a year to get the head coach? I would still say yes, because if you don't get the right head coach, it's never going to matter.
Yeah.
But it'll probably drive a lot of fans nuts, but that's just the nature of the beast now because it's just the timing. I would say you got to hold out, and if it doesn't work, you take a coordinator or an NFL guy for a year or two, whatever. But you got to go for the big hire if you're Penn State.
You don't make the move lightly to fire James Franklin in the middle of the season with a $50+ million buyout. I know he's entertaining other jobs, but that was the expectation, is that, hey, this is what Penn State is doing. So they knew they were going to get, you don't go out there, you don't make this move to settle. You make this move to make yourself better. So you started to allude to it. What is it going to mean for Penn State in recruiting if they make a decision later rather than sooner? What's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? The most realistic outcome there? And we still got to get to Urban Meyer. Brian, I want to get your thoughts on what it means for Penn State to say no to someone like Urban Meyer, as the rumor mill is swirling around. That's all coming up next here on this Locked On Crossover. Brian, we'll finish up by talking about the Urban Meyer rumor that Penn State actually told him no, that, hey, we're good, it's not going to work, and then get back into what you started to say about recruiting and the transfer portal, and that Penn State is essentially punting, and why that's okay, that's acceptable. So Urban Meyer, it was Zach Gelb of Infinity Sports Network that made the initial report saying, hey, I'm going to go on the record because I'm comfortable after hearing from multiple sources to say that Penn State actually told Urban Meyer no. And then the reason was because there was just a major disconnect between Meyer and what Penn State's expectations were for NIL. So that's understandable here, because let me point to some other rumors. Is that the issue with James Franklin, one of them was it wasn't just about the big game. It's the fact that NIL and the transfer portal weren't used as effectively, which is why Jeff Brohm and Brent Key are strategic candidates here, because and Clark Lee, he's also going to be on this board, but we didn't get to chat about him today specifically. They have all maximized the portal and NIL with the resources that are given at their university. So Urban Meyer being told no because there's just a massive disconnect he hasn't coached in college since 2018. So I am not surprised that actually Penn State said, yeah, this might not be a good fit for either side here, because we want to fix the problems that we had, and Urban Meyer would actually bring some of those because of his disconnect with name, image, and likeness.
I'm guessing he's not getting back in it unless he's just got carte blanche with whatever he wants. That would be my guess. I know Urban from way back in the day, and he's not a guy that's going to play from a situation where he's not at the top. He's not going to do it. At Florida and Ohio State, you're playing from the top because they had the best resources and all that. Penn State doesn't use NIL like some other schools, and he was probably testing to see if they're going to change it. If not, he didn't care. That would be my guess, just knowing Urban. I don't blame him. He's got 3 rings. Why would he go back into it unless he's got a very good chance of getting to a title game in quickly? So depends on what Penn State wants to do, because he might have wanted all the control over it, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of nuances there.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of it too. I'm not in those conversations. I haven't talked to Urban in forever, but it's still the same. If he doesn't have control, he ain't going to do it. He is a control freak.
There would definitely be a collection of influence per se. And I think Urban Meyer being out of the game, actually, it doesn't help either side. Again, with what Penn State wants to do and with what you said, with respect to what Urban wants to do, it just wouldn't have been a fit, especially since he's been out of it for college specifically, it'd be going on 7 years. That's a long time. And Penn State wants wins and results now. And I think it would, if Urban weren't able to succeed right away, that would be an issue for him personally as well. Be an issue for Penn State, be an issue for Urban, because he kind of expects to be 11-1 right out of the gate. So with that being said, recruiting is going to take a hit here in some capacity. We've seen Penn State's class of 2027 just disappear. We've seen the class of 2026 more or less hanging on by a thread. There are still players that they're verbally committed, but they're exploring their recruiting options. Okay. And that's understandable because you don't know. Brian, I have my preferred candidates. You have your preferred candidates that should take over at Penn State, but that's, like I said earlier, it's a pretty even race. Jeff Brohm, Brent Key, Elko, Manny Diaz, Clark Lee, Bob Chesney at James Madison. And if you're a recruit, you don't want to play roulette with Penn State's head coach. Okay? You don't know who you're committing to. So let's talk about the worst case scenario is what it is. You don't have any recruits for the 2026 or 2027 classes. 2027 is done and over with for now, right? You will build that out. I'm saying don't worry about commitments now, but 2026, it's okay because you have the portal. You're going to be able to just get, if whatever coach that you get, a head coach in particular, it's different with Brian Hartline because the portal doesn't open up if he leaves for that respective school. If Penn State waits, Brent Key goes into a deep postseason run or shatters expectations for Georgia Tech a little bit. I'm saying he wins a game that he's not supposed to, gets to the semifinals, something like that, and then leaves and later in January. The portal opens up and then Georgia Tech players will naturally follow him. I'm just giving an example, but that's kind of the realistic outcome here, is that if you get another head coach, his players will just follow him to Penn State for the most part.
That's exactly what happened with Indiana with James Madison players. They took 13 of them, and some of those guys are still returning, like Aiden Fisher. The linebacker is an All-American.
Yeah.
I mean, it's worked with several guys, but that's just one example. That's probably a good point. And for the record, I'm not so sure Georgia Tech's going to even be in the playoff. They still got to play Georgia, and they got one or two other games. Like
they would have to win the conference. They would have to win the conference championship. I'm just trying to give a hypothetical of somebody who has to leave in the middle of January and what it would do, right? The worst outcome, the worst scenario, so to speak.
But if he's out of the playoff, I actually think he climbs the ladder. Look, there's no way around it. The AD and the board of trustees, they don't want this crap on their plate. Come Christmas, they don't want those phone calls, but they're going to get them.
Yep.
There's those people that they have to talk to that spend a lot of money. They're going to call. Yep. So that's how it works. I would imagine following what Brent Key and Georgia Tech does is very important, because even if they didn't make the playoff, nobody expected them to. Yep. That is an 8-4 roster, is what it is. But they're winning games because of coaching. And let's give some credit to Haynes King too. That guy is a warrior. But they don't have the same kind of talent that even Tennessee does. But Tennessee's got 3 losses already. So there's a lot to be said for the ability to fine tune what you have, and Key's one of those guys. And I think, again, Brohm would be great. Elko would be great, but I need to see those guys come. I think Key would be the most likely out of that group.
Yeah, and it makes sense in terms of logistics. And again, the worst case scenario in recruiting and the portal and everything. Remember, James Franklin's going to be a domino in this as well, whether that's at VT, whether that's at Auburn, even Florida, if they get down their list and it's like, well, we got to give a call to James Franklin because we missed on our preferred candidates. He is going to try to bring as many Penn State players with him. There is going to be significant roster turnover, especially if you wait and hire the head coach later because of, again, postseason implications. If the coach doesn't show up until the middle of January, that just opens the door for a lot of turnover for Penn State's roster, in addition to all the seniors that you are losing. So you will get a good significant chunk of that team's roster, which was already good, to follow whatever respective coach to Happy Valley. But just know that there's going to be, one way or another, there's going to be a significant amount of turnover, especially if James Franklin takes a head coaching job in this cycle.
Could not agree more. So I don't want to say get used to it, but get ready for it in some capacity. I'll be curious to see which specific players for Penn State, whether they follow James Franklin or not, leave. It's just part of the cycle. And a lot of these kids are getting phone calls every day now anyway, because even if it's not a school, it's one of their buddies they played high school with. Yep. And they're at, Tennessee or Florida or Texas A&M, whatever. Hey, come play with me. We got a spot for you. That's how this works. It starts with players recruiting players too.
They all have agents too. So,
So there's no such thing as school loyalty now. That's not really a thing across college football.
I'm not here to say that Penn State is going to be bad as a result. Just expect a lot of player movement one way or another once this coaching search is finalized. Hey, that's where we're going to wrap things up on this Locked On crossover. Great in-depth episode to discuss all the possibilities that Penn State is working with, for better or for worse, and what could tangibly be on the table when all's said and done. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm the host of Locked On Nittany Lions. He is Brian Smith, college football expert, recruiting expert, host of The Portal, joining me here on this crossover. Make sure you like and subscribe. Make sure you like this episode, subscribe to both of our YouTube channels and wherever you get your podcasts. Brian, thank you so much for the time and the analysis and the expertise, as always. Can't wait to do it again.
Absolutely. Look forward to it.